Yo, what's shaking, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Overreaction Monday Show. I'm Jeff Ketchum. That is Anwar Richardson. This is the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. Thanks for joining us on the week of the Alabama game. Of course, this episode brought to you by RogueShop.com. Use the promo code OrangeBloods to take advantage of all of the goodies that can be found at RogueShop.com. Whether you're looking for, you know, there's a little bit of product for everything, aches and pains, and they have the salves, and you've got the I'm just drawing blank on what you call them, but they've got all of the cartridges.
They got cartridges.
They've got basically any product that you can think of. The gummies are super popular and help me sleep, and maybe I'm still in a little bit of a fog. Regardless, go to RogueShop.com. Richard in the game will absolutely take care of you. Yes, Mr. Richardson.
Yes, in fact, I got a message from Richard yesterday.
Yes.
He said to tell the fans of the show, if they do a Google review, that they will get a $15 gift card emailed to them. And he goes, if they make a review of a product on the website, they will get another $15 for a total of $30. So Google review of the product that you enjoy, $15 gift card. If you do another one of a product, if you make a review of a product on the website, they get another $15, total of $30. Essentially, all you got to do is cut and paste and get 30 bones. Just throw that out there.
Well, glad you did. Again, RogueShop.com, one of our favorite sponsors of all of our sponsors on OrangeBloods.com. So Anwar. Oh, and real quick, everybody, just as you get settled for the next hour or so, go ahead and like the video if you get a chance. Subscribe to the channel, get notifications, tell your mama, tell your papa, do all of those things. We would appreciate it. Onward, it's Alabama week.
Oh yeah.
We have been anticipating this really for the last 10 months, and you can even make a case it's been several years since this game was put on the schedule. There have been so many turns with regard and twists, considering this game was on the schedule before Texas and Oklahoma joined the SEC, really before we would ever have an idea of what this year's team would look like or what Alabama's team would look like. Surprise, they're number one. Game day's coming to town. Fox is coming to town. Recruits are coming to town. It is a big deal. Give me your opening thoughts of where your head is today, given that we just watched Steve Sarkeesian talk to the media and give his opening week thoughts on this game. What sticks out in your mind the most as we get started?
Well, one thing for sure is that Sark was definitely not going to give Bama anything bulletin board wise to put up or anything to that effect. I think he was very measured in all of his responses to make sure I praised them, talk up my team a little bit, but he wasn't trying to just make it seem like, yeah, I've let my guys know we're going to beat this team. Nothing to that effect. It was very interesting, Catch, because you saw the confidence in some ways, but then you saw him being a little reserved in other ways, right? So you heard the confidence, and we're going to do what we need to do. The field, all these kind of things. But then you also heard him kind of say, well, this game doesn't really count towards our ultimate goal, which is the Big 12 championship game, December 3rd in Dallas, right? So it was kind of like you're trying to be fair here because it doesn't. But then it was almost, I think he said it a couple of times, Catch, of like, hey, this doesn't really count to where we're really trying to get towards. And so you're trying not to feed too much into it. It's okay, he's not trying to just slunk out or nothing like that. But you just understand, I think he was very measured, Catch, in everything that he was saying. I think he was very, hey, this game counts. We're going to get up for it. But if the worst things happen and we do lose, we're still going to move on to what our ultimate goal is, which is getting ready for next week. And then, of course, conference championship game. So overall, I thought he did it really well. It is still, at the end of the day, there's still a ton of excitement about the game.
There wasn't a lot to overreact to from the press conference, to your point of making sure that he said everything about Alabama that would be the opposite of bulletin board material. I thought it was weird. Press conference started 30 minutes. I put Sean's comment up there because he mentioned that Sark's just so natural answering questions and his thought process. Sark was sweating a lot, which I didn't know if he had just threw a bunch of water in his hair, and I don't have hair, so I've forgotten what it's like to comb your hair, and I couldn't quite tell, if he just run some water through his hair to comb it, or
He
if
just
he
got off the
just
practice
worked
field.
out.
He just got off the practice field.
Okay, so that would explain it, because it still is. Even if it was 78 degrees on Saturday night, it's still an extended summer here in the state
Correct.
of Texas.
Correct.
So that help explains that. What did you think of his mood today in general?
I mean, I thought he was relaxed. He tried to, he threw a little dig at Chip, and then I think he kind of back. He was like, I was just playing with you." Then there was the reference was said it started going into one of his analogies of the that boxing game, and then he kind of joked about Sarkeesian did about having quarters and playing that game as he was growing up. So I thought it was kind of from a relaxed standpoint, but I think the other thing is realistic catch. I didn't see him really, when I say measured, but I didn't really see him. I saw him being a coach, but I didn't necessarily see him being a hype man, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't really see him saying, like, they put on their pants just like us. I mean, like, what's the big deal? Like, they're just, the Hoosiers thing where, it's, when you're measuring and like, this is this 10 foot and all these, the court is this. I thought he was realistic about, look, Bryce Young is good. I've known him for a long time, recruited him, known him since, he was in 6th grade, but then also pointed out, and I don't know, he seemed a little shocked. They said that he was running more in the past game that they did, and maybe he thought they just put that on tape just to throw off Texas, because he's like, I know this is a pass first offense, right? So, but he was realistic about the defensive ends and what they do from a front seven standpoint, and of course, Saban and working with him. So, I think it was realistic catch. I think more so than anything else. He seemed to be really realistic about everything, but then also talking about his guys and what they need to do, especially from like a mindset standpoint.
Yeah, if you haven't noticed, it is not there and hasn't been there since 2004, a long time ago since I had hair. Any overreactions? Like, before we get into just kind of talking about Texas and Alabama and this week, when we look back at Saturday and the weekend, not necessarily the press conference today, do you find yourself with a major overreaction coming into to today's show?
So I have two. I'll give you one off the press conference, and then I'll give you one over the weekend.
Okay.
The interesting part to me was, his answer to my question about, because we knew, and one of the things I reported was essentially that last week that, we knew Texas was going to run kind of base offense, base defense, right? And, now they'll start thinking about what the in-game adjustment is going to look like. And I thought it was really interesting. And he said they had that game plan for the last 3 months. 3 months ago, they've already had that game plan, which shows, from a coach speak, where they kind of try to say we take it one game at a time. They were definitely not taking this one game at a time. So it kind of bleeds into one of the things that we had reported last week as well, Catch, which was the Gary Patterson effect, the Gary Patterson impact into that game plan. So we know for months, 3 months ago, where they were at, and they were able to put a ribbon and bow, which means they had worked on that even further before that. So, 5 months ago, easily. It's also what's interesting too, Catch, to be able to say that 3 months you had it 3 months ago means to me you had a pretty good idea who's going to be starting for your team, right? I mean, you're not putting together a game plan without knowing, I'm pretty sure these are our starters. So basically by summertime, end of spring, you had a depth chart. You know who was who. There may have been a couple of little things to figure out, a couple of little tweaks, but they knew exactly who their team was and what they were going to be, and it kind of went from there. So that portion, just knowing for me that this thing has been done for 3 months, not in all they're doing is going to add to what they saw this week. Very interesting, and I don't think he's going to try to be thrown off by what he saw in there. I think the only other overreaction from the weekend is we know there's going to be growing pains with Quinn. And the one thing that they didn't put a lot on tape over the weekend catch was the deep balls and connecting on those deep balls. And he talked about it a little bit today, still needing to get in the rhythm, and Quinn gets to get into rhythm. But my only overreaction and a little bit of concern for Texas is we just didn't see them connecting on the deep balls versus ULM. And if you didn't see them versus ULM, I think it's clearly going to be a little bit more challenging to complete the deep balls against Bama. Like, that's going to be hell of a step up as far as that is concerned. So that's probably my only little overreaction, just a little bit of concern because a lot of those connections were short passes, somewhere in that 20-ish yard range, I think, but nothing deep. So those are probably the two things.
My internet is shaky a little bit.
Okay.
So apologies.
Okay, here we go. You're good now.
Okay. I think that when we look at the quarterback situation between the two schools, this is about as one-sided of a mismatch for Texas going the wrong way as you could possibly have. Because, I was just thinking about the timing of this game. One team gets to come in with the best player in college football as their quarterback, and the other team gets to come into the game against the number one team in the country with a guy who's playing in the second game really of his career, hasn't connected on a deep ball. We're at the stage of Quinn Ewers' career where there's a lot of firsts. This will be his first game against a ranked team and his first game, non-conference game against a major opponent. He still has road games and Big 12 games and all of these things. And it's just an interesting time for Texas to play this game. I think Quinn Ewers will get as much out of this week, no matter what happens. I think he gets as much out of this week and potentially advances his learning curve going through a game like this. But you think about Bryce Young, he comes into this game and he's done everything at this point. And there's not anything that Texas will be able to offer that he won't have already seen before. So when you think about this game, I always typically in game predictions and things like that lean on taking the team with the better quarterback play. It will be up to Quinn Ewers this week to be able to, they're going to have a chance in this game. They may need him to go toe for toe with Bryce Young. They may need him to advance his play to a degree that didn't exist on Saturday night. Now, a lot of Saturday night had to do with what you mentioned before, them playing somewhat close to the vest, not wanting to show a lot of things. I did think it was interesting that Sarkeesian, on one hand, says our game plan's been ready for 3 months, but on the other hand, they played it so close to the vest that Alabama wasn't going to learn a lot from what they saw on Saturday. And I do think there's something to be said for new players. When they do game plan, I think they pretty much they do their advanced scouting for all 12 teams on the schedule about 3 months in advance. And every assistant coach on the team will get a game that they're somewhat responsible for in terms of learning all of the things as best as possible going into the season about those teams. But Alabama started 2 new offensive tackles in their game against Utah State on Saturday. And the matchups between Barron Sorrell and J.C. Latham, those will be 2 young guys. I mean, there's only so much that you can know about a team in the second week of the season. I just am I'm excited to see where this game goes on Saturday for the test of it all. I'm excited to see the test that Quinn Ewers will be presented with and how he responds. And I kind of feel that way about every player on the roster, other than Bijan Robinson and Xavier Worthy and maybe a couple of other guys. Maybe most of this is this Texas team is comprised of players that I think have a lot of proving still to do as college players. And I'm fascinated to see how they do this week. Quinn will be such a big story. And the development on War, like you said, can they connect down the field? how much of the offense can they really put on display against an awesome Alabama team remains to be seen.
And it's tough. It's interesting, and it's a tough one because Catch, I've seen threads on Orange Bloods, and there's been a few people that have gone to the why not us, why can't we do this, what blah blah blah, and I get it. As a fan, you don't want to sit here on a Monday and just tell yourself this is impossible, it's not going to happen. But you're correct, Catch, and it's going to be a test, and but the hard part about this test, though, Catch, and kind of one of the things I wrote in my column is like, it's hard to almost use Bama as a measuring stick because it's like, well, how do you measure against one of the greatest teams? First of all, how do you measure against the number one team in the country? How do you measure against a team that's they consider to be one of Nick Saban's best teams? How do you measure against a guy like Will Anderson, who some people think may be the number one overall pick, or Bryce Young, who's coming off a Heisman? How do you measure against the GOAT of coaching? Like, we can't forget, like, he is the GOAT. Coaches have come and gone under Nick Saban, but one thing has remained the same: he still keeps winning no matter who the hell's coaching for him. So we know it. Everybody else is Scottie Pippen. He's Michael Jordan. So and we know they've got talent from stacked. And Catch, we know even if they have an opportunity to go to their backups, those backups are really talented people who are going to want to play and do something. Those backups aren't going to come in and say, all right, let's just run the ball and do nothing and to keep the score low. I mean, they're going to want to eat as well because they all have NFL aspirations. So it's a hard measuring stick for me, but it'll be interesting to see how they get up for it. How to respond to the adversity. And then for me, if they don't shock the world, as I saw one in the comments, right? Paxton talked about shock the world. If they don't shock the world, then to me it's all going to be about what were you able to learn from this, and how do you build and grow and get better as a team? How do you rebound and be ready for UTSA, which we clearly see is a team that has some life and will be ready to come here in the DKR. How do you get ready for that? Like those would be the things. But to your point, Catch, Quinn, I mean, your second start, this is what you're doing. Like that's tough. That's one of the reasons why I've always hated the Texas non-conference schedule. I've bitched about this for years. I've always hated the let's put in all these tough teams in week 2 and not give this team any runway or leeway just to improve and give guys 3. Imagine what Quinn would have looked like if you don't have Bama here, Catch, and they just they play Tulane this week, followed by UTSA. It's probably just totally different in conversations that you have going into Tech, knowing that he's got 3 games as opposed to this. So it is what it is. It's done what it's done. It'll be interesting contest, but there will be definitely, to your point, Catch, little battles within there where you can kind of see, all right, how do they measure up against ultimately the best?
My gut instincts at this point, my spidey senses tell me that I don't think Quinn Ewers is quite ready for this game. And I think that, it's not just about the deep throws, which I think is a work in progress that extends back to his high school days. You think back to camp, and while Ewers wins the job and has moments where he was really good, he turned the ball over pretty regularly throughout camp, did so in the scrimmages. And, you start thinking about this week, and it feels like you almost have to bake in a couple of turnovers into this Alabama game. You have to almost expect that, and that you'll have to overcome that. I think one of the things, your point about where they go from this game is probably the most critical thing that will permeate from this entire thing, because they're going to learn a lot. There are going to be guys that play well on Saturday that will go, okay, this guy now has a new marker down for what his ceiling can be based on what he did against Alabama. And then there will be other guys that struggle, and it might not matter at all, right? I mean, if Kelvin Banks struggles on Saturday, you'll be able to legitimately say, well, he won't play Will Anderson again, maybe until he's in the NFL. right? I mean, Alabama presents some challenges for this Texas team that can't be replicated the rest of the season.
Not at all.
But sometimes facing that brings out the best in you or brings out more of you than playing a second La Monroe would. Mm-hmm. And so, I think one of the real exciting aspects of this game is finding out which of the Texas players on this team are really ready for a big game like this. And then there are guys that, I think about the defense and how well they played Saturday against Louisiana Monroe, but not tested, really. I mean, there was only so much because Texas was so much more physically dominant. And I'll get to the Super Chat question here in just a second, or the Super Chat comment. I have no idea what to expect from this defense against Alabama. The pass defense wasn't really tested, but they will be this weekend. They were able to dominate Louisiana Monroe 11-on-11, despite the fact that their middle linebacker was kind of a no-show. I mean, one of the things that sticks out from Saturday night as a little bit of a negative is that Jalen Ford played a lot, but wasn't really productive, had more missed tackles than tackles. How does he respond now against an Alabama team that brings Jahmyr Gibbs to the table as a running back? Can Texas not miss tackles against Alabama the way that, for the most part, they didn't miss tackles against Louisiana Monroe? I wonder if our big task will be to show up next Monday to do the Monday Overreaction show and not overreact to anything that we see on Saturday, because I think there will be things that pop up that will make us want to really react to them. And I just wonder how much of Saturday translates for the rest of the year.
I mean, it's going to be interesting, because I think to the point, Catch, the rebound of it. And again, listen, this is Catch and I's opinion. You're a diehard Texas fan and you talked yourself into a win. I want you to stay with that, keep that energy all week long, and, hope for the best. If there's one thing Catch and I will always agree on, if we predict Texas to lose, we would love to be wrong. There is no part of us that will hold on to that.
Saturday.
Yes.
I mean, can you imagine?
We would love to do a post-game show on Saturday with you guys drunk on the Kool-Aid, talking about, you guys were on the Monday Overreaction show, talking about how they need to react going into UTSA, and look at us now. Catch and I welcome that. Please let that be the reality. We'll take it all day long, 7 days a week, and twice on Sundays. But if it doesn't happen, then it's definitely going to, like I said, we saw UTSA versus Houston. That's a tough team. We know they're competitive. They got a quarterback that moves around. But yes, how do some of these guys go against the elite of the elite on every position? Like, it's one thing, Catch, to go against one person and you get Xavier Worthy against a good cornerback. It's another thing if everybody in the fucking secondary, excuse my language, is amazing. From the DBs, the cornerbacks, or your nickels, or your safeties, like, all those guys are good. Your front line is there. All of that. Now, here's a question. I have a question for you, Catch.
Go for it.
Is there any way that you can talk yourself into an upset? And maybe if I couldn't talk yourself, maybe the better question is, if an upset occurred, if we're talking about a Texas A&M moment from last year, right? What would need to occur in your book? Maybe don't talk yourself into it. Maybe just say what would need to happen for that to happen.
I think what happened on Saturday night against Louisiana Monroe, where all three phases of your game find a way to create touchdowns. It shouldn't be understated that special teams created a touchdown, the defense created a touchdown, and obviously the offense had some success. If you're getting that in a game where you're the underdog, I think you're able to trim some of the margin of error with your defense creating points, your special teams creating points. I think that's a big part of a recipe towards getting a win on Saturday against Alabama is obviously Bryce Young can't have a Heisman level game. I think real quick. So Longhorn Recruiting Force says the key to keeping the game close is don't let Bama get momentum early. Once they start rolling, it could get nasty. I want to go to another super chat comment. Pet Brewster's got a really good question here, and I want to lead into the question of what do we think the point total is. I ask you this almost every game, right? What's the point total that's needed? How many points does Texas have to score on Saturday to beat Alabama? And then it's about how does Texas get to that point total? And I think they're going to have to be in the 30s at a minimum. Now, could this Texas team with all of its offensive weapons get into the 30s? Yeah. I think if this game is played 10 times, Texas can get to the 30s with Bijan Robinson and Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington and Jatavian Sanders. I would venture to go so far as to say that Texas has the best skill talent that Alabama will probably play all season long. There are very few teams in the country that can say that they've got a 1-2-3 running back, wide receiver, tight end punch that's as good as Bijan, Xavier Worthy, and Jatavion Sanders. And I'm not even including Jordan Whittington and some of the other players that they have on offense, along with a quarterback in Quinn Ewers that we think eventually is going to be an NFL player. So there's a lot that Texas brings to the table that against any team in the country, if everything goes right, I think you can put yourself into a position to win that game. The question is, what's the benchmark for what Texas needs to do as a minimum bar? And I think 35, 38 points may be the minimum needed to win this game. I think to get to that point total against this defense, they'll need some help from the special teams and the defense in creating points. That's probably the number one recipe of getting there. Is if next Saturday we're talking about Texas had a pick six and Xavier Worthy had a punt return for a touchdown, you start adding those plays and suddenly you're asking your offense to produce 20-something points potentially, and you're giving yourself a shot. I just don't know without those things if this offense with a young Quinn Ewers is quite ready to go step for step with an Alabama offense that, can't stress it enough, Bryce Young is just on a different level by leaps and bounds over what Texas will face in the remainder of their schedule.
I mean, you're 100% correct, Catch. And I was looking because I was trying to look a little bit. I'll probably have to do a little bit more. I don't want to do this on the spot. I was trying to look a little bit at that LSU Texas game. I was really trying to examine the box score and see what kind of success that they had there, because I think it's got to be something to that effect. One, whatever scoring opportunity that you have against a team like this, you've got to take advantage of it, right? So there cannot be the mental errors. And I know Keontae Ingram has moved past this, and I know that he is drafted. He's in the NFL, and and he went to USC, and more power to him. All that kind of stuff, right? But we cannot forget. I always wonder, man, if that ball was caught, what does that game look like? To me, when you have that opportunity against Bama and it's early, you've got to make the catch. You cannot give away the opportunities. Like any opportunity that you're there, you got to score. And I know, I would also say, Catch, settling for field goals ain't going to cut it. It's just not like you get down towards the red zone. I'm not saying pull out the binder, but what I am saying though is, you got to score touchdowns. Like, you got to take advantage every time that you are down there, because you start settling for field goals against a guy like Bryce Young, who, I mean, look, this guy's going to throw passes like it's on a zip line. Like, that's the kind of accuracy that he's going to have. You've got to be able to take advantage of that. And so, we know there's going to be, it's going to be challenging. I think Quinn's got to get rid of the ball early and fast. Like, the slow developing play is probably not the one that you want to do against this defense. Like the quick things and the quick outs. And I know he's going to take shots, and I know Sark likes to take shots, and maybe he's going to have to, but he can't I don't know if there's going to be enough time back there catch for 4 and 5 Mississippi. I know on 5 Mississippi is going to be tough.
Oh, 5 Mississippi will get a dude killed. Steven,
Okay.
I'm going to come back to your question in a second. I did want to answer Pet Rooster's question here. What point differential against Bama represents a reason for real concern? So if Texas loses by 20, which is the point spread, that's what he's talking about. Is that a real concern for this team going to the rest of the season? I don't think so. I know, God, it sounds like such a ridiculously stupid moral victory to suggest that losing by 20 is not a bad thing that you should freak out about. But if the score is 48-28 and we show up on Monday and, barring it being 48-7 and then Texas scoring the last 21 points in garbage time, if it's a 48-28 fairly competitive game, I think you show up next Monday and there's a lot of potential optimism in that level of performance. What if it climbs to 30? What if it's 50-20? What's the number for you that we show up next Monday and this game is problematic because of the end score?
It's interesting. It's because there's a couple of different things. I mean, it's like, look, if we played Michael Jordan, one-on-one, let's play a game to 21, and Mike had 21, and we had 6 or 8, right? I don't know. Like, we'd probably be pretty happy with that.
Hell yeah. He scored 8 points on Michael Jordan.
Now, here's the thing. If he put his hands down and you just banked a couple off, you banked some long shots, then it doesn't look as good. Like, you got it, but it was a bank, right? It was just some long banks that you just got lucky on.
He let you get a layup uncontested just because.
Yes. Yeah. So I think catch, if we're talking 50 plus and Texas hasn't cracked 20, then I probably would say that's going to be problematic. So I think if it's 55-17, if it's 55-13, if it's 52, whatever, that's what, to me, where I probably say if this team can't score over 20 and move the ball at all against them, that would be a problem. But for me, catch, there's also going to be the little nuances within that too, which was how does it. How did the run game look? How did the passing game look? There's going to be a lot of little things. Was there pass rush or anything to that effect? I'm sorry, there's a bunch of folks going to do some interviews, but I don't know who that is. Whoever it is, I'll ask them for some help. Let me make sure let me just make sure it's not Quinn, because maybe he may have had this day off from school. So let me go ahead and put my phone down just in case that is him. Okay.
All right. Well,
yeah, just give me 1 minute.
You go ahead and do your thing. I'll go ahead.
No, I'll be right back. I'll put my phone down.
Stephen Sharp in the super chat asks, Quinn over and under 1.5 turnovers this week. I'm taking the over. And I think that again, when we start talking about what the recipe of success is for this game, to get a win, not make it competitive, not that this is a fourth quarter game and Texas has a chance to win the game. When we're talking about how you've got to bake in, I think, Quinn making some mistakes in this game to get to the fourth quarter, the game being competitive. They're going to get to Quinn with their pass rush. It's going to happen. They have the best pass rush in the country, along with Georgia. They're going to have moments where they flex. And how Texas responds in all three phases of the game will determine how competitive this game can be. I think you've got to bake in Quinn making a couple of mistakes, maybe a fumble and then an interception. And so I'm taking the over. If that was a prop bet, I would definitely take the over. And then if you're Texas, you've got to be able to find a way to overcome that. So you've got to force turnovers. And it doesn't necessarily mean that Bryce Young has to throw a bad interception or that his level of play has to dip down to a point that's unrealistic. But Alabama's got guys that are new. They've got a bunch of transfer wide receivers. You need those guys to run bad routes potentially or balls to go off their hands like we saw Saturday night. I mean, realistically, on the play that Deshaun Jameson gets a pick six, that should have been a first down for Louisiana Monroe with a good throw. The Louisiana Monroe quarterback, though, throws a high ball. It goes off the receiver's hands. It goes into Deshaun Jameson's hands. He runs it back for a pick six. You need that to happen against Alabama. You need Xavier Worthy to be a difference maker in special teams. I think that will be one of the really major points of emphasis for Texas on Saturday. How do you make this game close? Win the special teams battle by a lot. You need a kick return for a touchdown or setting up a short field at the very least. If we show up on Monday to do the Monday Overreaction show next week, and Texas and Alabama is just a push on special teams, then I think the quality for Alabama on offense and defense becomes really problematic for Texas. But if we show up next week and it's like Texas and the Jeff Banks-led special teams on war, we show up next week and we're talking about how they won the special teams battle in one-sided fashion. That's a recipe for the game getting a lot closer all of a sudden, because it's really hard to factor in what it means to have an Xavier Worthy return for a touchdown or a block punt or whatever would add up to Texas being emphatically a winner in the special teams phase of the game. If that doesn't happen, I was just saying it makes it really harder to figure out how Texas bests Alabama when Alabama's just better 22 versus 22. But the special teams potentially, because Texas has to clean some stuff up too. They can't have drops on field goal attempts. They can't have their punter get in the yips at any moment in that game. But boy, there's no question that Texas has some difference-making ability in that phase of the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a game where you definitely have to have the impact, because I'll start with the bottom, the last thing you say, and then work my way forward, which is, to your point, those miscues. To keep it close and then to have a chance to win, those mental errors just cannot exist, like in any phase of the game as it is, but definitely not on special teams. That special teams, like we've talked about, it's the one area that no one thinks about it until you don't have it. Like, and everyone else thinks about it. What is going on? What happened?
We'll get to it. Eric Torres's super chat question just has me cracking up, because for all of the questions he could have had, he went with the most demoralizing one possible. But continue your thought.
Yeah, well, I've learned. I think I'm realizing that there's some guys who, like, their guilty pleasure, what they're going to spend money is going to be the super chat. So I'm enjoying it. Like, you're like, hey, it's Monday, I'm going to drop $10. So not going to spend it on lunch, but I'm going to spend it on these, these things and enjoy myself. But yeah, the special teams portion, because when you think about it, like, Banks has done a really good job, I think, Catch, from a special teams component. Like, I'm not trying to jinx him, but big plays, it's not really a thing that they give up. They're really good on tackling. We don't look at it and say, man, what the hell is going on there? Remember a few years ago when Charlie was here and we tried to determine who the hell actually ran special teams, and it was like a group project where everybody had to say so in special teams, and that's one of the reasons why it looks so chaotic. Banks is the opposite of that. He's been really, really good, I think, in excelling at that one particular portion of it, especially the blocking. Like, he's figured out something with Keelan Robinson and now Deshaun Jameson, like how to put those fast guys on the end and just utilize that speed. It seems like it's something so simplistic, but yet he's found the way to say, all right, he can identify the talent and say, this is where I think you'll be good at, for guys who hadn't really done it since high school. So I think Keelan Robinson, I asked him about it before the season, and he's like, man, I asked about the success on it, and he's like, I've actually never really played special teams in high school, because a lot of these guys are stars where they're from. So I definitely would agree with you. That is one unit that cannot afford a mistake.
Now, Anwar, before we get to Eric's super chat question, which is more of a statement than a question, which is, if Texas gets Route 66 UCLA type game, you have to make a move Sunday night. I'm assuming he means at the defensive coordinator position.
Oh.
Man, that's an awfully negative piece of juju to insert it into the show. Like, I feel like we were having a good conversation, and then someone brought out an axe and started swinging.
But here's why you can't do that, though, Catch, because I think it's based off of what Sark said today, which is he said they've had a game plan for 3 months. So he didn't say this is Pete Kwiatkowski's game plan. He said they have worked on it. So this is what they have sat down as a staff and worked out all off season. He's been had a little bit more of a hand in it in the off season, or a lot more of a hand in it. And so I don't even think if that happens, you can even go to like, okay, now it's time to demote Pete, because this seems to be a cumulative effort by everybody, not just a Pete game plan.
Well, you can't show up on Monday before the week of the game and say, we're not making too big. This isn't even a game that decides where we're going for the Big 12. You know what I mean? Like,
correct.
To some degree, he diffused the buildup to the game today by saying this game doesn't even impact our ultimate goal of getting to the Big 12 championship game. We won't even be around for game day. Like, why do we care? I mean, we're not going to be there. He diffused the magnitude of this game a little bit. You can't then turn around 5 days later and make a change at one of the most important positions on your coaching staff. It would be yelling fire in a crowded theater when it's probably the last thing this team doesn't need that. So even if Texas gets hammered 66-3 on Saturday, which is the infamous score of the Route 66 game against UCLA back in 1997, the difference in context, Anwar, in that game was that Texas was ranked 10th and was coming off of a Big 12 championship game, and there were real expectations for Texas in 1997 with a senior quarterback in James Brown. And if I'm not mistaken, UCLA was either unranked or they were maybe in the 20s. And they ended up being really, really good, that UCLA team with Skip Hicks and Cade McNown. But Texas was the favorite going into that game. This is different. You got to put some respect on Alabama's name. And look, the Utah State guys are doing it today, right?
Mm-hmm.
They went 11-3 last year. They showed up in Tuscaloosa on Saturday, got shut the hell out, had a 55 spot thrown up on them, and it could have been more. And today they've got to make sure their season doesn't fall apart. And I think that if Texas gets routed on Saturday, I think you've got to give Kwiatkowski and this staff and this team a chance to put Humpty Dumpty back together again the next week. And we've talked about it for the last couple of months. Suddenly, not just suddenly, the UTSA Texas Tech combo games become really important. I don't want to take the attention off of the Alabama game, but this game, when it's over with, Texas is probably going to lose against Alabama. And how they respond in the next weeks that follow will start to define the direction that this team goes in. Eric, I totally understand where you're going because last year's defense was terrible. But I just don't know that pushing the red button on Sunday, if things go haywire on Saturday, is in the best interest of this team. It doesn't mean that you don't potentially do it later in the season. If you give up 48 to UTSA the next week, maybe there's a conversation to be had suddenly about, hey, this just isn't working. But boy, I'm going to stress all week long, do not overreact. Do not overreact to what we're going to see on Saturday against Alabama. This is a unique game. Look, I watched Georgia. I don't know about you, Anwar. I'm watching the Georgia-Oregon game over the weekend. And Georgia's just battering Oregon. And Oregon's stiff. It was a top 10 team coming into the season. And Georgia just made them look like a bad JV team. And as I'm watching that game, I'm thinking back to God. Alabama and Georgia probably going to play twice this season, and they're just on a different level. I did my analysis of super blue chips, and Texas, I think, comes into this game with 7, and Alabama comes into this game with like 35. So don't freak out if a team loaded with developed NFL players ends up playing like a team with a bunch of developed NFL players. This game's just part of the process for Texas, and I really think if you're Texas, God, I don't want to say you get through this game because we want to be excited about it, and Saturday should be a hell of a lot of fun, but you've also got to be realistic about it enough. And I'm not talking to me and Anwar here. I'm talking to everybody watching this video right now. You've got to be realistic enough to know that if Alabama wins this game by 3 scores, it's not the time to freak out and start pushing the panic button. It will, at that point, give you a real evaluation of where Texas needs to go and where it needs to improve. And how, look, think back to I think the key to this game, Anwar, because someone in the media brought it up. It was maybe it was Dennis Delapena who said, you played Arkansas in week 2 last season, and they kicked your butt up and down the field and made it look like you just weren't prepared for that game. I think what you want after Saturday and how you'll know that this program is really making progress is that in week 2 you play a better team than Arkansas and are much more competitive than that game proved to be a year ago. If the Alabama game's as ugly looking as Arkansas was a year ago, then then I'm having questions a little bit about everything. Because I fully expect Texas to be competitive. I don't expect the Arkansas game at all. That hasn't even crossed my mind a lot. So I don't know. I just think if on Saturday you see a more competitive game than you would have seen a year ago, then it's the definition of improvement and steps being taken forward, being made.
And by the way, Catch, let me just add into this. I think we've talked a lot about, the players and, that being a measuring stick. I also think this is a measuring stick for the staff as well. One of the attributes of Tom Herman's teams was he would get them ready for a big game. Now, and we know that we saw that in Georgia, we saw that versus LSU, we saw that in the bowl games. Like, the one thing he had a reputation of, even going back to Houston and with their win against Florida State, he had the reputation of being a guy that when it came time to prepare for a big game, he would have his guys prepared and ready to go. Now, look, Alabama's a different beast. I'm not going to deny that. But you want to see a team that was more better prepared than they were last year, to your point, than they were against Arkansas. You 100% want to see that. And, you want to see a team that is a coaching staff that is utilizing their strengths to the best of their ability and at least keeping it close for whatever period of time that you can keep it close, but game plan and put your guys into a position to hopefully succeed. Now, at the end of the day, if they're just monsters and they're just a chainsaw and you just can't handle it, then it just is what it is. But I also think Catch, often we talk about players and what players need to do, but coaching also is about hiding the deficiencies of your team and getting the most out of it. And it's not always about because every coach wants to feel like, well, if I have Alabama's roster, I would win, and they would just try to recruit Alabama's roster. Well, that's asking a lot. Most people don't have Alabama's roster, and so what can you do with what you have to be as successful as you can be? I think that, to me, is also part of the key. Is what the staff does and how they step up.
I think Only Roadkill has a really good question in the super chat. Such a good question that I want to kind of stretch it out a little bit.
Okay.
Let's start on the offensive side of the ball, go to the defensive side of the ball, and then go to special teams. Who's your X factor for Texas on Saturday? Let's start on the offensive side of the ball.
Anybody who's going to go against Will Anderson. I mean, so, if we're talking Christian Jones or, is the guy, or if he's going to line up on another side of Kelvin Banks, wherever Will Anderson decides he's going to make his home, that's the guy, because you can't have that guy drilling your quarterback every single play. So to me, whoever's assigned to stop this person, and whoever may even have to double team him. So if Jatavian may need to double team him a little bit, or chip him and slow him down, that for me is going to be the X factor on offense. What about you?
I'll go with Quinn simply because I think a lot of people are bringing up really good points about Texas being really competitive. We've already talked about it with LSU back in 2019. That was a sensational game. And what's interesting about that is LSU didn't quite come into that game with the rep that they would eventually have, but that was one of the best teams in the history of college football. Mm-hmm. And Texas went toe-to-toe with them. The key to Texas going toe-to-toe with them was that Sam Ehlinger went toe-to-toe with Joe Burrow for most of that game. I mean, that's how that game ended up being super competitive. Texas's older, experienced quarterback played one of the best games of his career against one of the toughest games, one of the toughest opponents that he saw in all 4 seasons. I mean, 2019 LSU is the best team that Sam Ehlinger played against while he was at Texas, but he lifted his level of play up to match a guy that is in the conversation for like top 5 quarterback in the league right now. I think that it's probably too soon for Quinn Ewers to go toe-to-toe with Bryce Young, but they can't be competitive if he's not really good on Saturday. I mean, if we're talking about on a 1 to 10 scale, he's a 6 or a 7, then I think Texas loses this game by the point spread. If he plays at an 8 or a 9, then I think this game's got a chance to be really competitive on Saturday. It's asking a lot. I mean, it really is. I literally just got finished saying that I think I would take the over on Quinn Ewers' turnovers being set at 1.5 on Saturday. So I'm suggesting he played at a level that mixes that and is much better. But how Quinn Ewers plays on Saturday, I think, will largely define the game score. And you mentioned Kelvin Banks. There's the little things inside of that is he can't play well if he's running for his life or taking bullets or, if Kelvin Banks is having to scrape Quinn Ewers up off the floor a lot on Saturday, it really becomes even more difficult to say, hey, Quinn, I know that, you're getting killed out there, but hang toe-to-toe with the best player in the country in Bryce Young. But Quinn Ewers came to Texas for games like this, for moments like this. And even if it's week 2, I think ultimately his stat line will tell us a lot about this game. So he would be my X factor. What about you on the defensive side of the ball?
We've been going back and forth on this, but I think at the end of the day, it is, and then I know we're going off for one game. I think Barrett Sorrell ends up being my X factor. There's just no way you can survive if that quarterback is comfortable. If Bryce Young is comfortable and he can just figure out what he wants to do, go to a second read or third read, and he's not having anyone beating down his chest or having someone pick him off the ground, I think it's a long afternoon. When I start looking at the defense catch, there's a lot of guys from last year. The guy who could possibly breathe some life into this and make this thing, a better defensive unit, so we're not having a repeat of last season, is probably Sorrell. So for me, I think he's that X factor. I kind of thought about DeMarvion, but DeMarvion and what he does off the edge is potentially there. But I think Sorrell, especially with his speed as well, that to me is the X factor.
100% agree with you, Anwar. I think Sorrell, the question mark about this Alabama team, not just the offensive side of the ball, but their team as a whole right now, is its offensive line. Now, that you look at their left tackle, and they were able to pull in a transfer from Vanderbilt, who's regarded as one of the best linemen in the SEC. So I expect that guy will be okay. Over on Sorrell's side of the ball, he's going up against a guy in J.C. Latham who is making his – so Saturday was his first career start against Utah State, which means he's going on the road and playing as a starter at right tackle, first game of his career. We think Sorrell is one of the better players on that Texas defense. He was certainly one of the two best players on the defense on Saturday. Sorrell, what's interesting about that is that they're both in the 2021 recruiting class. Latham was the number 3 overall prospect in the class as a 5-star. His projection is that he will one day be a first-round NFL draft pick, whereas Sorrell was a high 3-star guy that was rated – it's like a top 50 Louisiana kid, but not an impact player. Yet here they are in this game. And I think there's a lot of responsibility on Sorrell's shoulders to give Latham, a young offensive tackle, some problems rushing the passer, creating plays in the backfield against the run. He's got to be disruptive, because if he's not, I don't know who the response. It's a hell of a lot to ask Sorrell of, and what is essentially, his second career start, right? I mean, but I think he's capable of doing it based on what we saw on Saturday. And come hell or high water, Texas has got to disrupt the Alabama offense, and he is, in that matchup, is I think one of the ones to keep an eye on. Weirdly, my second guy might be Snacks. I think he's going to play a lot on Saturday on War. When I looked at Byron Murphy on Saturday night, one of the things that just jumped out to me, and I don't mean this to be a slam against him, because I really do think he might be the best defensive lineman Texas has, and we may be saying that by the 12th game of the season. But he does not look like an Alabama or Georgia football player. Right? If you look at Murphy off the hoof, you don't go, oh my God, what an impressive physical specimen. Keandre Coburn looks like an SEC football player, even if he doesn't and hasn't always played at a high level. He's a big dude that when he gets in the backfield can create some havoc. And against an Alabama offensive line that its interior maybe even a bigger question mark than its tackles. Winning that matchup, I think, is key to getting Alabama disruptive on offense. If this turns into a 7-on-7 game because Texas can't get to the quarterback and can't be disruptive with
and if Texas freezes the way I was going to say, and if Texas freezes the way Catch's internet freezes,
I don't understand what's happening today with my internet. But yeah, I'm picking Snacks as my number 2. Are we going to differ on special teams as an X factor?
No. The only problem is we just don't know what to expect from the kicking or the punting portion of it. That's the only thing. You feel pretty good about every other aspect of it. It's just those two it wasn't like the kickoffs either were just that booming, either. So just want to throw that out there. Yeah.
And Utah State didn't try to do a lot with that, but Alabama might. I think we take Cameron Dicker and those kickoffs for granted, because he was a touchback machine, and it became, I thought, pretty evident on Saturday. Okay, kickoff returns this year in terms of your kickoff coverage will be a little bit different. I want to say that Xavier Worthy is the X factor on special teams, but it probably is Pearson or whoever is actually punting for Texas on Saturday. You can't have what happened last Saturday happen this Saturday. And it wasn't even a disastrous mistake, but all pistons have to be firing on Saturday. And if Texas is not firing on all pistons on special teams because that part of their game can't figure itself out, it's just the kind of thing that makes it hard to beat the number one team in the country really hard.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you. Xavier Worthy, again, when you talk about wanting to, how do you win, and especially in the margins? Yes, if you could tell yourself Xavier is having that kind of success, and with the return game, and even if it's not touchdowns, but just in field position, and really shortening the field for Quinn, where he doesn't have to go 80, 80, 75 yards or 80 yards or whatever the case may be, but he's shortening the field to make it into 60 yards, all those kind of things. Like, it totally will make a huge difference as far as that. I think the thing, Xavier, the return game, because we expect, obviously, ULM really wasn't, putting up a bunch of points, but we definitely expect that to happen for Alabama. And when that happens, making sure that you have good field position for your young quarterback is going to be key.
Marlon asks in the super chat, "Hey, Catch, what was A&M's blue chip ratio or rate when they beat Alabama last year?" Great question. Completely fair question. Probably right about where Texas is today. I mean, so A&M was at 24 super blue chips, including this past freshman class, whereas Texas is at 9. But a lot of that came in this past, I think 10 of those come from this year's recruiting class. So they were sitting at about 14. And if you look at them now post-attrition, A&M has the third, tied with Ohio State, the third most super blue chips in the country coming into this season. Alabama had 30. Let me put it to you so Alabama's got 27. Georgia's got 22. Alabama had 19. Ohio State has 19. Texas has 6 post-attrition. If you look at including transfers, the percentage, the roster percentage for Alabama is that 38.8% of its roster is a super blue chip player. Texas is at 11.8. So Alabama's got 3 times as many super chip players, whereas A&M's at 22.4, which is 4th best in the country. But again, if we're pointing towards last season, A&M's probably ahead of where Texas is this year, but not by a lot. That 2022 recruiting class at A&M side has really boosted their super blue chip numbers in ways that have them competitive with Ohio State. We wouldn't have said that a year ago. We'd say they were closer to where Texas is this year, but that one recruiting class, which really hasn't kicked in yet for them on their roster, changes their numbers significantly.
Catch, what is, for those who may or may not know, what's the super blue chip? What constitutes one?
So it's either a high school prospect that was either a high 4-star or a 5-star. So basically a national top 65, 70 player. And then I included transfers who were in, I think it was the top 25 of the athletics.com's transfer rankings. Because I didn't want to ignore transfers in the discussion. Alabama gets a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, and he almost rushed for 100 yards on Saturday in his first start, a former Tashard Choice pupil at Georgia Tech. I wanted to find a way. It's an arbitrary number that I selected, but I think I picked it at 25, and to include guys that transferred across the country, so that USC would get credit for a Jordan Addison the way that it otherwise wouldn't.
Gotcha. Just want to make sure everyone was down with that. What's the super chat? Is this what about
Everyone's
Alfred Collins?
asking about Alfred Collins, and I don't know that we've got a great answer for that. I mean, he didn't suit up on Saturday on WAR, and he isn't, when healthy, I think viewed as a difference maker on that Texas defensive line right now by the coaching staff.
Yeah, well, Sark said that, I think he said on Thursday that Collins wasn't going to play, but he did practice some on that day. So it didn't seem like it was a major injury. So we didn't, we'll probably have the good idea by later this week. We'll see how much he practices and the participation, all that other kind of stuff. But within the next couple of weeks, probably no later than the Texas Tech game, he should be back. So it's not nothing major. But now to the greater point of how much he plays once he comes back, we'll see. That's totally different. But right now, he's recovering, but getting better. To answer your question, Eddie.
I'd be surprised if he plays more than 15 or 20 snaps on Saturday. I think this team will largely go with this Texas team will largely play the players that it depended on against Louisiana Monroe. I don't know that Alabama's the game that you want to be breaking guys in, and that's a long way of me also saying that I think that Agiye Hall probably has a minimal role on Saturday. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean he doesn't come out and either A, get a chance to have a deep ball thrown his way, or doesn't. I don't know if I froze again or not.
Yeah, let's start to wrap up, Catch, because it's getting more and more now. It's becoming like once every couple of minutes now.
Well, let's take Jake's super chat question real quick, which was, when was the last time you remember this much of the fan base has accepted a potential beatdown like this? Ooh, that's a good question.
Not in my tenure.
Like this? I mean, they haven't played a team like this other than that LSU game. And that nobody thought of again, in retrospect, that LSU performance was one hell of a performance by Texas that night. I don't have a good answer. Maybe Notre Dame on the road in 2015. And they got their ass kicked in that game as well. I think that ended up being a 38-3 game.
Correct.
But the quarterback position was in shambles. That was a Tyrone Swoops year, and nobody really was – he didn't even hold on to the job beyond that. I mean, Gerard Hurd comes in pretty quickly after that Notre Dame game. But, God, I don't even think that Alabama game – I mean, the Notre Dame game comes close to matching what we all think of Alabama. So,
yeah.
You're maybe about, never in all the years I've been doing this. Maybe never.
You're talking about what a number one ranked team, but it goes past that number one ranked team with the one of the greatest coaches, if not the greatest coach of all time, against it with a team that's coming off a 5-win season and still in rebuild mode. Like that's a lot of stars aligning for something like that to occur.
All right, hey guys, do us a solid. I'm looking at the numbers right now. We have 142 likes on the video. There's almost 550 plus in the chat right now. Like the video right now. Just click that little thumbs up button for us. Give us a little love for our YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. I'm going to do a video. I think I'm going to do a video tomorrow early on. Well, you and I will be recording early tomorrow. So we'll have a video out tomorrow. I'll be doing my show Tuesday night. You'll have the Drunk Uncle show Wednesday night. We have the modcast on Thursday. We will have Texas, Alabama content out the wazoo all week long. So like the video, but definitely subscribe to the channel. Get notifications so you don't miss a thing. Any final comments you want to sneak in before we sign off, Anwar?
No, I'm just excited, for the week, what lies ahead. This is, I mentioned it on Saturday. I will mention it again here now. If you're a Texas fan, regardless of the outcome, this is the excitement you have to look forward to going forward. And as far as SEC opponents, catch this one. Obviously, this is game day. This is Fox. This is all those kind of things, and it has a lot to do because of Bama and Sark. But once we get past that, the games that Texas will play in will matter, will mean something. It won't be the I guess they got to go play against this team or that team. And it's, Kansas State's coming to town. You got to talk yourself into being excited about that. It's not just no disrespect to Kansas State or Texas Tech or anything like that. But when you start thinking about that SEC schedule, and Bama won't be on there every week or every year, rather, potentially. But what you think about what it entails, I mean, this is why you get into this kind of conference. This is why you get into SEC, so you can play these kind of meaningful games. So you're looking forward to the buildup of the entire week and seeing what happens. But I tell you what, it feels good to cover games that people care about. So from a selfish standpoint, it feels really good to be covering games that people want to talk about and care about, as opposed to what we've covered for a long period of time, which is
when I brought you over from covering the NFL, Anwar, it wasn't under the guise of, half the games nobody will just ever care about. So I'm 100% with you there. I do want to say this. John said this game reminds me of the Georgia game where many people said Texas didn't have a chance. Just want to remind everybody that I wouldn't compare it to that Georgia game, because Georgia was still kind of on their ascension where in terms of accumulating talent. But I predicted that Texas would beat Georgia that game by double-digit points. I was all over that game. So
yeah.
And I'm not all over Texas beating Alabama.
Don't forget though, but that year too, Catch, that was a 9-win Texas team that also went to the Big 12 championship and beat OU. So there was a reason you saw something before we got there that could give you inspired confidence. That's the only difference. All you've seen right now is ULM, and I know you're not going to say based off of ULM, you're going to make that jump.
After La Monroe following a 5-7 season, you're exactly correct. Guys, hang with us all week long. I'm going to let Anwar get back to his other responsibilities today. At some point, Quinn Ewers will be showing up.
He already talked.
Okay, Quinn Ewers already has talked to the media. There will be more guys throughout the afternoon. Anwar has long days over at Belmont Hall on Mondays during the season. For myself, Jeff Ketchum, and Anwar Richardson, one last time, like the video, subscribe to the channel, get notifications, tell your mama, tell your daddy, tell your sister, tell your brother, even
tell your internet provider. Tell Spectrum, tell Verizon, tell Boost Mobile, tell my dial-up connection, tell AOL, tell Prodigy, tell all those people. Are you back?
I am. I had actually signed off.
Ain't nobody heard you talking.
You guys be good to each other a second time.